Hello, I'm Kristen. Welcome back to Learn English with Be Global. I look forward to teaching you today. And today we are going to talk about the weather. So the weather is basically, what's it like outside? What is the weather like? What is the temperature? How does it feel? Typically, talking about the weather is something very common for all people to discuss. So it doesn't matter where you come from, what language you speak, what nationality you are, what race you are, none of that matters. We all know about the weather. We all go outside and feel what it feels like out there. So today I want to be able to talk to you about how you can talk about the weather in English and different things that you can say. So many times someone will ask you, what is the weather like today? They may say, what is the weather like? Or maybe even, how does it feel outside? And typically, you want to say, it feels nice, if it in fact feels nice. Nice means that you can go outside, you can do anything you need to do outside. The weather is pleasant. It's a positive thing. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's not raining, it's just nice. It's nice outside. If someone tells me that it's nice outside, that means I would be able to go and have a picnic lunch in the park, or I can take my dog for a walk. And I don't have to worry about any part of the weather affecting what I need to do outside. That's when you say that it's nice. So we're going to start here and talk about what it's like when it gets to be a little bit warm. If it's warm out, that means that the sun is shining. Like my drawing of my sun here. That means that the sun is shining and that it feels good, but it's warm. So it's not cold. You want to make sure that maybe you have a hat just in case, and you want to dress lightly because it is warm outside. Then we go from warm to hot. And there are two different types of heat that can happen when you're outside. There can be a dry heat, or there can be a wet heat. In a dry heat, the sun is beaming, shining down on you, and it feels like it's right here. It feels like the sun, you could just reach out and touch it because it is so hot, and it's dry. It's very dry, meaning there's no moisture in the air, there's no water on the ground. It's just a truly dry heat. And that's when you feel like you're burning up because it's so hot. Or someone might say, it's a scorcher today. It's scorching hot outside. Now, with a wet heat, we usually will say that it's very humid. Humidity means that there is a lot of moisture in the air. So it makes things feel very sticky, and it makes things very uncomfortable. When it's hot and it's humid, you feel like there's a layer of water and stickiness on you all the time. And it just feels heavy. The air feels heavy. It makes everything very wet and very sticky and very hot and humid. And when it's humid, there's a lot of island places, anyone that lives near the islands, whether it be Hawaii or the Caribbean or even the Mediterranean, there's a lot of humidity there. We don't get a lot of humidity here in California. Every now and then we will. Sometimes it will come in waves, and they'll say there's an upcoming heat wave. And that heat wave is bringing humidity with it. And with a heat wave, typically it lasts 3 or 4 days. It can last up to a week or two, but when they forecast a heat wave, you know then that there's coming soon a big wave of heat, and it's going to be hot. It's going to be abnormally hot or warm, and not like it typically is. And when we talk about seasons, there's 4 seasons throughout the year. We have summer, fall, winter, and spring. And those different seasons for different areas, the weather changes all the time. So typically, all of these hot days, all of the humid days would fall in the summer. Notice I said fall in summer. What I should say is they take place in summer. I was speaking of these types of temperatures when it's really hot is typically in summer. Sometimes it can cross over into fall, but usually it's just in summer. And then as we get to fall, we start to kind of cool down a little bit. So before we get to the colder weather, I also want to talk about thunderstorms, rainstorms, lightning. Do you guys know what that is? So when we have a lot of clouds, it gets really cloudy. Typically, it's cooler when it's cloudy, but not always. So we're going to go ahead and put the cloudy here. And I drew my little picture of a cloud up here. That's my cloud. Clouds can be white, they can be gray, they can be black. And when they begin to be gray or black, then you know there's water forming in those clouds. Then you know it's going to rain. And this is my little bit of rain. So we have to realize that we can have rain in the heat or in the cold. It happens both times, and it's the same word. Whenever there's water falling from the sky, we call that rain, regardless of what the temperature is. So we have rain, and with rain, a lot of times we will have thunder, and we will have lightning. Here's my little lightning. That's a horrible drawing of lightning. So lightning is when electricity shoots from the sky. It's usually really bright, and it usually comes down from the cloud like this to the ground. And it's a big lightning bolt or a big bolt of lightning. And if there's lightning, there's thunder. Thunder is that big grumbling noise that's really loud, and it's very scary if you're not used to it. So thunder makes a really, really loud noise. It's all of the elements of the weather kind of running together and making this big grumbling sound. And then lightning is what you see after the thunder, as a lightning bolt that comes down from the sky in a big flash of light. It's like a big beam of crooked light that comes down. And you have to be very careful when you're in a rainstorm and there is thunder or lightning. There's also thunderstorms, in which case it's a big storm with rain and lots of thunder. So that kind of goes through, those thunderstorms and lightning can happen in the heat or in the cold. And they truly, in many parts of the world, can happen in any season. You just never know. So as we go into fall, things start to cool down a little bit. So it can feel cool outside. So maybe you'll need like a little sweater or maybe a little light jacket. You might want to wear a hat if it's really chilly. When it starts to get chilly, then you know that you're cold. The chilliness, let me put the word chilly. If someone says it's chilly outside, that means we've gone past the point of it just being cool and comfortable. It's definitely not nice, and it's actually getting cold. So you want to make sure that you have a jacket or something to help you. And then as we go down, people will also say that it's crisp or brisk outside. And these are all very common for fall. And that's typically when it's still very comfortable. You may get a little bit of rain, and when it just starts to rain, but it's really, really light, and you can barely even see that, we call it drizzle. And then as those raindrops become a little bit more, we start to call it a sprinkle. So the drops are coming down, but they're not coming down a lot. And then once they really start to come down, then we've got a ton of water and a ton of rain. And we would say that it is pouring outside. We use the word pouring. Pouring rain. So with the pouring rain, then you know that everything is just getting soaked. I got soaked. That means my whole body was just covered in water. All of my clothes are wet. I'm soaked. And then as it starts to get even colder, it starts to be freezing. It's freezing outside. That means it's really, really cold. And if you add that freezing to rain, it starts with hail. And that hail are basically tiny little pieces of ice that are coming down. They can be tiny, sometimes they can grow to be quite big. And they don't feel very good when they hit you because they're hard. It's almost like it's raining ice cubes or little pieces of ice. And we call that hail. As it starts to get even colder, that hail will turn to a powdery white substance that we then call snow. And then that's more of a blanket of white, and it's a really light kind of shaved ice that falls everywhere. And when we have a combination of rain, hail, and snow, we call that sleet. And those are very, very scary conditions. You want to be very careful if you hear that it's sleeting outside. If there is sleet, that means that everything is very icy. It's a combination of snow and hail and rain and water, and it makes everything very cold and icy and can be very dangerous when you're driving. And then if we end up combining wind, if things get really windy, that means the air is just pushing everywhere. When it's really windy and you also add the snow, then you end up with a blizzard. Oftentimes with a blizzard, you can't see in front of you because the snow is so thick and it's blowing everywhere. You truly cannot see in the blizzard. So what we have here then are all the words and the terms that we may use when the weather is cold. And typically for cold, we would go to winter. Now, in my experience, spring is usually a combination of both. In spring, everything blossoms. Everything that's old is new again. Everything that has been covered in snow or water or rain starts to grow back, and there may be some wind. A lot of times with spring we get allergies, so our nose gets all stuffy because everything is blowing around in the air. So spring can truly have either one. Sometimes the springs are cool and they're nice. Sometimes they get very rainy. Sometimes the spring can be warm and humid. It just depends. So I'm just going to go with both of these for this one, because spring really can go either way. And here in California, our weather is so different. We may have winters where it's dry heat and it's burning up. It's so strange. And then other times we'll have a spring where we end up with hail or it's very cool. So there's very often times that the seasons may not always correspond with what these weather temperatures are. It depends on where you live. But at least you know how to talk about it and what to say. And before we go, I do want to go over some natural disasters. So a natural disaster is anything that happens with the weather and the elements that causes major problems in our country, in our city, on the land. And these natural disasters, there's 4 main natural disasters. We have a tsunami, which is actually a Japanese word that we use here. And in a tsunami, it's typically something that starts way out in the ocean. There is an earthquake of sorts out in the water. And because the plates of the earth have shifted, the water pulls back and creates a huge wave that will land on whatever the first coast is that it hits. And when that happens, you get major flooding. Whenever there is flooding, or whenever there is a flood, that means that there is an excess amount of water. There is more water than we know what to do with. And it typically will start to rise, and it can consume buildings or homes or cars, and it can be very dangerous. And with a tsunami, there is flooding because of that big wave that's coming over the ocean. And then we also have hurricanes. A hurricane will typically start out in the water as well, but it involves a big cycle of wind. And it involves wind, and there's usually rainstorms and thunder and lightning, and that huge cycle of wind starts off in the ocean and then moves on its way to the land. When it gets to the land, it starts to pick up everything in its path. There's flooding again, and there's rainstorms. There's damage everywhere. Hurricanes are very, very scary, and they move very quickly, so you never know where it's going to hit. Another similarity to a hurricane would be a tornado. Tornadoes start on land. So a hurricane involves water and land, and a tornado is mostly just land. It's the same thing. It's a huge wind tunnel that just starts, and as the winds get stronger and stronger and stronger, it will start picking up buildings, homes, cars, anything in its path. Now, the only nice thing about a tornado is that oftentimes you will get a warning. They will know when a tornado is coming, and they can kind of guess its path, sort of. So when you have that warning, if you live in an area where there are tornadoes, at that point, you can take shelter and keep your family safe until the tornado has passed. And then we have earthquakes. Now, living in California, I've been through several earthquakes. Earthquakes are very scary because you don't know when they're coming. You don't know how strong they're going to be, and they typically don't know any of this until they're over. So with an earthquake, the ground is truly shifting, and it makes everything move. And it's very scary. So the earthquake can go from a mile to 15 miles. And it can be a small little jolt, or it can be a rolling wave. And earthquakes are very scary because we never know when they're coming, and they can cause a lot of damage as things fall over because the ground is moving. So those are your main ones. We also have what's called a drought. A drought is when we have not enough water. California, right now, we are in a drought. We have not gotten enough rain or enough flooding or anything wet in a very long time. So everything is very dry. Our rivers are drying up, our lakes are drying up, and that's because we are in a drought. We have not had enough precipitation or water or rain coming into our weather systems to keep everything wet and healthy. So we are what would be then called a drought. And then another problem that we often have is fires. And with the fires, a fire in of itself is typically not started by weather. However, it is the dryness in the air and the wind that comes through that will cause the fire to spread and then make it a natural disaster. So I hope that you have learned a bit about weather today, and when someone asks you, what is the weather like? You will be able to give them an answer. You'll be able to say, it's nice, or it's cold, or I'm freezing, or it's raining, cats and dogs. It's another thing we like to say, that it's raining cats and dogs. That's just our way of saying it's really pouring outside. So I hope that you all enjoy your weather this week. Please feel free to leave us a comment or subscribe to the channel here at Learn English with Be Global. I look forward to teaching you again, and I will see you very soon.